Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we are talking about Andor, Episode 11 with myself, Paul Hoppy, and Matthew Kappell. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host. I'm joined, as I said, by erstwhile guest, never an actual host, Paul Hoppy. Paul, how are we feeling today?
Medium, continuing to appreciate the series, perhaps more than enjoy, but and then, getting some physical ailments, but nothing like the oppressive crush of fascism.
That's fair. That's fair. And Professor Matthew Kappell, you're once again joining us. How does today find you?
Today finds me pretty well. I mean, my wife is in Michigan and I'm home alone, but otherwise I'm pretty well. Thank you.
Well, I hope you're getting to enjoy that a little bit, but hopefully she returns soon. For those who haven't heard, Professor Matthew Kappell is a professor of, I kind of think of you of pretty much every topic that comes up, you wind up having some great knowledge of. So, but I think officially it's American studies, right? You've done a lot of work on pop culture films and mythology and things like that.
Yeah, American studies is what they hired me to teach, but now they let me teach anthropology too. And occasionally I teach writing because I get really annoyed at bad writing.
Well, I'm so glad that both of you are with us, and I want to jump in, but I first want to give just a little bit of feedback that we got, and I want to apologize. A number of you have been writing into the email address superheroethics@gmail.com. That is an email address we used in the past. I now use matthew@theethicalpanda.com, but I realized I thought I had auto-forwarding set up from that old email. It has not been set up, so I'm responding to some feedbacks from a long time ago. But we also got one fairly recently from someone who I think is going to be a guest on a podcast at some point soon. But she wrote in, this was the first paragraph, and so I wanted to share it, from Erin McGowan. My name is Erin, she, her, and I've been a huge fan of your podcast since discovering it this last year. I love to listen along while I drive and yell my opinions at the radio like I'm right there having a convo with you guys. Your podcast has been a huge comfort when I'm anxious or having trouble sleeping. I put it on and just relax to the beautiful sounds of Star Wars. I've been a Star Wars nerd my whole life and have watched all of the Star Wars content maybe a few times too many. Don't think that's a thing, but maybe a few times too many. Okay, to be considered normal or healthy. Again, I'll go with, I don't think healthy, but definitely perhaps normal. Star Wars has been one of my greatest comforts and sources of hope as I've worked through a difficult past year healing my mind and my body. I'm so glad you share Star Wars and its joy and hope with everyone. That was just really wonderful feedback. And Erin, thank you so much for that. I'm really glad that we've been a small help. This is one of the few times that someone can tell me that my voice puts them to sleep without me thinking it means that I'm boring. So I'm really glad for that. And yeah, just want to, I hope that you're continuing to have healing on your journey and that we continue to be a part of it. And I look forward to hopefully having you be a voice on the podcast.
Yeah, that's a great message to hear. I hope I haven't poured too much rain on anyone's enjoyment of Star Wars things. I know outside of this series, I definitely find I'm often one of the more negative voices, but it always makes me happy to see when something makes someone happy,
Very much so. Very much so. That's, I think, to me, one of the real joys of podcasting like this is knowing that people are enjoying it and, that they're getting the same kind of joy out of it that we are. All right, so with that, let's talk about the shiny, happy Star Wars story that we continue to have unfold before us. The journeys through the empire of Mr. Cassian Andor and friends. What do we think of Episode 10? Episode 11, forgive me.
I think that was just a setup episode for the end, but it was also wrenching, wasn't it? The fact that Fiona Shaw's character, Marva, dies off camera was perfect, I thought. And I rushed home from classes today and sat down on the couch and watched it and promptly cried. I happened to spend all day in class today talking about death too for some reason. And so death has been on my mind, and it was, the lack of a heroic death is something we need to see more of in media, because most deaths are not heroic. So I was just very appreciative of that.
That's such a great point, especially because as we've talked about on earlier episodes, even like the people who are part of the raid against the payroll, the people who died there, they didn't die glorious, heroic deaths, standing up to defend them as they flew away. They just got shot or had things drop on them. So
I would say like none of these deaths are cinematically heroic, right?
That's a good way to put it.
In the way that we think of in like most of the deaths in Rogue One, right? I think are very kind of cinematically heroic, even if they're not some like moment of overt sacrifice, like I'm gonna fly this thing into some other thing and blow it up. Like we know that they're dying in an overt act of heroism, killed by the enemy, basically. I would say that like Marva's death is, I think she is in a prolonged act of heroism, but like very much not a cinematic one. Like it's not a stereotypically heroic death, but like she has chosen to, remain on what is her home and kind of, fight the good fight, even if it doesn't mean like actually going out and, like actively, taking direct actions, which, I thought she was probably going to like die blowing herself up, like trying to blow up that hotel or something when they talked about, when she mentioned like what she'd been doing at one point. But like, I think living her life the way she did at the end was like, in some ways, like a small act of resistance. And so like, I think she can be seen as being heroic without, it really looking heroic in a really obvious in your face kind of way.
I think that's a great point, especially because like one thing I was really struck by was how much we saw the community respond to her death, and that it was this huge, like I think that was such a good way of showing us just how much she meant to this community. And, it ties all the way back to those first episodes where when the basically Imperial SWAT team showed up and the whole neighborhood was like banging on walls and bells and kind of coming together, like you really get a sense that she was a very big part of this neighborhood and a real leader to this neighborhood.
Yeah, it's clear that there's this very strong sense of community there on Ferrix, right? And I mean, we've seen that earlier, and we see that here. I do think it's important to see, natural deaths as well, even though we can, they kept being like, turn the heat on, like, and maybe she didn't turn the heat on because she wanted to save money, and so, capitalism kills, like, but it is, it's, I want to circle back to something from the very first episode. Tony Gilroy kind of wrote his own review of Andor, when the supervising, security person on Morlana 1 was proposing like how to write an accident report to cover up the 2 killings. He said, make it, sad but inspiring in a mundane sort of way. And
wow,
in a lot of ways, like I feel like that's what this show is. It's like it's very sad, from the beginning, I feel. But there's also, I think, some inspiration there. But like in a mundane sort of way, it's not about the spectacle. It's not about, one individual act of sacrifice. It's about sometimes a lifetime of sacrifice, whether that's Luthen and, everything he was talking about in episode 10, or Marva just being like, no, I'm going to stay here, like I'm staying at my home. I'm not, letting the Empire like drive me out of my home, basically.
At that moment, I also found it very significant because it's a big problem with Star Wars, that people empathized with the droid.
Yes.
The way I was thinking so much about you, Paul, and how you said that it was one of your favorite characters, and just it was so painful and so beautiful the way they let us really see the droid's reaction. B2, let's use its name as part of empathizing.
Yeah, I mean it. I was thinking like Marva dying kind of reminded me a little bit of in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like Buffy's mom, just like, just being dead, right? It's like this happens, people die, and it's not always some real concrete, oh, here was the reason, or, I mean, there is a medical reason, right? But it's not, it's not always a story unto itself, outside of the fact that they've died. And thinking that, she was alone there, but like she wasn't alone, B2 Emo was there the whole time. And I mean, actually, we don't know whether he was there right at that moment, but I feel like I mean, I wonder if the last 3 letters like EMO are chosen.
I was just thinking that as you said it. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, in a lot of ways, I feel like B is like the heart of the show, and sort of like the most overtly emotional character, despite being a droid. And I really loved the way they showed that. And I forget his name, but Andor's friend, talking to B2 and like spending, okay, just one night, like I'll stay here with you. And I mean, I remember after my dad died, like one of the hardest things for me was, I often wanted like friends to be over to hang out with, and we'd hang out, and then they'd go home at the end of the night, and like we even lived in the same building, so like, and it wasn't like that big of a deal, but it's like I had this sense of loss, of absence, right? I felt the absence of my dad being around, and it was just me and my mom, and having people who were there kind of like made that feel less severe. But then they would go home, and then I would feel that more, and so I don't know, I just find B like super relatable.
I also think there's an interesting contrast there. And like, we're definitely going to talk about Mon Mothma and her daughter in a few minutes, but one thing that we talked about with Mon Mothma a few episodes ago, but that has come up a lot in fiction, because I think a lot of times it's fairly true, is that often people who are kind of like great people, who are, beloved of huge communities, they're leaders, they're, public speakers, they're people who inspire large groups. They can be wonderful family people as well, but often they're not. And I think we're getting more insight into Mon's family. And I certainly don't want to just say, oh, she's a bad mother, and that's why she's not close to her daughter. There's obviously a lot of complexity there. But B2 in many ways feels like kind of a halfway in between a droid. I'm sorry, he is a droid. Kind of halfway in between like another one of her children and the beloved family pet. Like or like an animal that is part of the family. Like I've read a lot of stories and heard from friends about things like, when someone dies and like, the dog or the cat that they loved, doesn't want to leave the apartment and all this kind of stuff. And I got a lot of that sense too from B2. And I don't think that happens if there wasn't a strong connection between Marva and B2. And obviously, like, Marva, kind of bossed him around and kind of had some, harsh words for him sometimes when he wasn't, doing his best. But I think there was still a really strong connection between those two. And that to me told me a lot about B2, but it also told me a lot about Marva and how she related not only to the community at large, but to the people in her home.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was definitely like a little abusive and dismissive towards B2, but like also, treated him like a person, but like the way you might treat it, like hush a kid, right? Yeah. When like other adults are over, which like, not cool, but not the worst, right? Not the worst either. So, I thought their dynamic like was a bit uncomfortable, right? But also like very, very real feeling. And, the same thing with Cassian and B. Like in the very first episode, like the way he talks to him, like is sort of like the way one might talk to perhaps like a younger brother who it's like, oh, I need you to, keep mom from, being suspicious of whatever I was doing. I was out late. I need you to cover for me. And like it always felt like there was a level of caring there, and also from Marva towards B, especially when the not stormtroopers came and tossed the house. But like this kind of like, I don't know, it's like that sort of familial love where it's like almost like taking someone for granted sometimes, right? Because like, well, they'll be there, and so it's like, well, I'm just going to handle what I have to handle now, and it feels like that's been Cassian's arc so far, right? Is like always trying to deal with what's right in front of him, and some of that's out of necessity, and some of that's out of his own choices, but I feel like there has been this gradual arc towards kind of understanding that, the Empire is this pervasive problem. Like it's not something that you can really run away from anymore. And, I can only imagine like what he's feeling for like not having been there, that he wasn't there for her. And, he wanted to take her away, but like it turns out there wasn't anywhere to go to really.
Right.
And then we all stopped and got quiet because it is sad.
It is sad. It's just so sad.
Well, and Matthew, I wanted to ask you in particular about the little ritual that they have, because if I understand correctly, like anthropology, one of the things it kind of looks into is sort of the study of like, rituals that people have around things like death. And, I really love that this is one of the things that Star Wars does is just, it's not a huge plot deal, but just gives us like the particular traditions and cultures of these different communities all over the galaxy. And I was talking with someone else about how, they were saying that like this idea of like, burning their body, like cremating them and then mixing those ashes into, a brick seemed really weird. But then like shoving them in an ornate box and putting that box in the ground, like, wouldn't that seem just
so
as weird?
Like,
so yeah, I was kind of curious in what your thought on how they sort of just, didn't make a huge deal of it, but introduced that particular ritual for this particular community.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. There were like 2 moments in this episode that were very good anthropologically for me. And that was one of them because funerary rites are really important. And if you talk to people from different cultures, even the most accepting people are like, okay, I understand that your food is different, and I understand that you treat classes in your society different, and I understand gender works differently this way or that way. But the thing that can truly get a person to feel culture shock, is funerary rites. The way we go and deal with our dead is, when it's different in another culture, it really shocks us. So I thought it was beautifully done. I thought, one of the characters, I think says to B2, she's in the stone now. And that was a moving line that made it feel very much like a real culture, like a real invented culture. And I thought that was just fantastic to also emphasize that it wasn't going to be the kind of funerary rite that we think of. Which is ridiculous, the way we deal with our dead, right? So I love that. I will just, as an aside, say the other great anthropology moment for me was in Luthen's shop when Vel goes in to talk to Luthen's colleague. Mm-hmm. When they have their little argument, she's standing right next to a Mayan calendar, which is a round disc that's very specific to Maya archaeology. And in Star Wars, Maya stuff is Yavin 4 stuff. So I thought that was very nice to see that, because you immediately knew where it went, and it was immediately, again, enriching the idea of the invented culture that we're getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. And especially one thing I was really struck by was the idea that, like, once you make the brick, you'll find a place for it. That it's not like that they're being stored somewhere. It's that the idea of, like, because that's just one sentence. What it really conveys is it's not that we're building new things. It's that everything is slowly falling down. And there's going to be a wall that's going to have a hole in it or something else where we need to just put a new brick in. And so we'll find a place for that brick.
Right. There's like a functionality there. Right. Where then that person is, like Jimmy Hoffa gets to be part of a structure.
Even though you're dead, you still have purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Exactly.
It reminded me a lot of the Orson Scott Card, who is an author I, like many, many people, have a lot of issues with, but in one of the later books in After Ender's Game, I think it's Speaker for the Dead, but it's, Ender is going off to other planets and having new adventures, and he encounters a culture where there's a lot of confusion about what people do with death, and is there something weird happening? And eventually they realize, no, it's just that they plant seeds, like, in the ground where they put the body. The idea being that, like, this new tree will be fed by the nutrients of this body as it slowly decomposes. And, like, I always thought that was such a beautiful thing. And because it's being like new life being created from the life that's passed. And here it's not life, but it's building. It's shaping all that. Anything else from that? Or should we move on to Mon Mothma and the very creepy Girl Scouts?
I I did just want to say that, like, I do think there's like this real challenge in trying to create a galaxy of cultures where, you know, you might be inclined to borrow from a bunch of, you know, real world or our world cultures, but like you probably want to do it carefully and not in a way like you might do in, you know, some parts of like the Phantom Menace or, you know, and so I think that just to me strikes as one of the biggest challenges of like creating a world with real cultures in it. And I don't know, to get kind of the anthropologist seal of approval, I think that means a lot. So.
I think when you try to borrow cultures, you're exactly right. So when it's well done, you have to give them a lot of credit because it's so easy to do poorly.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm really struck by, especially with that example you gave about the Mayan calendar and Yavin 4, is that not only are they trying to do it well, but they're acknowledging when they haven't done it well, you know, because in the late 70s, I don't blame George Lucas for this, but I think in the late 70s, very few people were thinking, you know, if we shoot on location somewhere to represent an alien society, let's make sure this is an accurate representation of that culture that we're shooting. And, you know, Yavin 4, it looks like a jungle planet, and there's some, you know, a temple that, like, yeah, if you learn more, you might understand that it's I think it actually was shot at one of the temples in Guatemala. I'm not, that is from the Mayan culture. So yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there was no representation of that at the time.
At that time, Princess Leia's hair is a Navajo hairstyle. So,
interesting. Okay, that's cool. But yeah, and so the fact that they are now going back and honoring that, I think, is really awesome.
A note on just the museum or the gallery. Apparently, a lot of these Star Wars Easter eggs, like Tony Gilroy's not like super into the Star Wars Easter eggs. So like some of the set design people just like sneak these things into the gallery.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he's like, oh yeah, that's cool. You know, it's like, I'm not going to go trying to put all of these references places, but I'm going to hire people who know the references and can like insert them subtly. And so they're not like centered in the story, but they do give this, this real depth.
Right.
I think that like feels kind of effortless to me.
That's a good
like
word.
you said, like in an art dealer's shop, of course, you know, a place that sold historical, you know, who's-its, like, would have that kind of thing. And why make a bunch up when you have this very rich world?
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, but I love that Tony is just like, whatever. Put whatever there.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. That's great. I love that it works. But, you know, it's not a big,
Well, it's something you've said on this podcast a lot, Paul, which is when fan service is done well, it's done well. But when it's done poorly, it's just horrible. And it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Right. It's something that if you're looking for it or if you're apt to see it, then you see it. But if you don't, it doesn't take anything away. It's not like, what did I miss? You know?
Right.
Like, I had to Google Rakatan invaders or whatever when I was looking up some of the, you know, the Blue Kyber Sky Stone references from episode 4. So,
and the Rakatan is great because that's strictly from Legends. That's not from the Disney canon. That's from the Legends canon. And I think that there's been more and more of that, but this show especially, I think, is really doing a lot to sort of honor some of the stuff from the Legends canon, which I'm not one of those who's like mad at Disney for, like, you know, turning the page and saying we're going to kind of create a new version of that canon. But I do like that they're like, yeah, we don't want to be beholden to it, but kind of like the way like the MCU is a different canon from the comic books, but they still can honor things from the comic books. It feels like that's the relationship to the Legends now, which I really like.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about the Girl Scouts and Mon Mothma. We're not buying cookies from them, I think.
Oh, no.
I have a lot to say, but I want to kind of start with either of you. What was your reaction to that scene?
Negative. Like, not like it's a bad scene, but just like children chanting anything, always creepy.
Yeah.
Just always creepy. You know, either they're some sort of possessed evil beings, or they're some sort of possessed beings possessed by some evil, like, you know, fascism or whatever traditional creepy stuff. I mean, it doesn't have to be creepy, but it's just like, there's been a lot of creepiness throughout history, I think, in terms of, you know, indoctrinating children into some really messed up customs, which this seems to be one of.
But yet again, they do the culture well. Right. There's a little aside that the daughter says something about being within the braid or has been braided or something.
Right.
That gives you this whole like implied backstory of we have this way of talking about things that involve the fact that we're all a bunch of teenage girls with braids. That I just thought was great. I mean, I did expect Jack Nicholson to come around the corner at any moment, but
yeah, I definitely got that, and I appreciated how subtle it was because, like, I mean, to me, the implication was that this is the group of girls who want to go back to the old traditional Centrillan ways, in which, among other things, girls got married at very, very young ages, and I'm guessing there's a lot of women maybe being homemade. Like the implication carries a lot of Handmaid Tale kind of ideas, and there were little references to honoring tradition and putting aside certain things, but they never said we will be loyal wives and stay home and obey our husbands. None of that had to be said. It was just implied, and I'm painting the most obvious picture of it. It doesn't have to be anywhere near as extreme as I'm talking about, but it still gave that sense, particularly because mostly what we saw wasn't the girls themselves. It was the horror that Val had at the idea that Mon was letting her daughter be part of it. And Mon clearly having the space of I don't like my daughter being involved in this, but I also know that telling my daughter she can't is just going to push her even more into her father's arms and away from me. I really felt for Mon at that time, especially as a teenager who probably got involved in a lot of things my parents would not have wanted me involved in. And I mean, I don't mean when I was hanging out in the park and my friends were smoking pot, my friends were super, as a teenager, the first political campaign I worked on was Rudy Giuliani because I was an idiot teenager and I wanted to annoy my parents. And I was very dumb. And at that point, he was this was before he became all the crazy things. And I mean, he was always crazy, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. He hadn't gone full.
Yeah, he was pro-choice. He was pro-LGBT. He David Dinkins had done a lot of stuff that was really anti-Semitic. There's a whole long thing. But also, I was 16. I was an idiot.
I worked on Ruth Messenger's campaign. I just want to throw that out.
I think that's a little better.
Quit meowed at me at one of her.
The only campaign I ever got paid to work on, got paid for, was a Republican running for prosecuting attorney in Detroit. So yeah, we all have embarrassments in the past. But there was a paycheck.
But the point is, but if my parents had told me I couldn't go do that, it would not have gone well. I was a headstrong kid, and I think that's. I don't know. It was just such a beautiful scene to me because it is on the one hand showing this major kind of political tension I think that's happening with her wanting to push things forward. And yeah, I mean, it has never really been stated before, but fascism and empire are very, very often connected to returns to traditional values and, stomping down on these crazy feminist ideas and stuff like that. And so just the way it was all tied together to both tell you a lot more about what's happening in the empire and tell you a lot more about what's happening in this just individual family it just blew me away.
Yeah, I thought, again, I'm going to say that I think in terms of the sort of the extent to which this is actually clearly a representation of a patriarchal culture, right? Or whether that's kind of an implication that we can get, whether it's actually implied or we're just supposed to kind of feel that. I mean, the only Cindrillan couple that we know of who went through these old customs is, Mon and Perrin. And, I mean, Mon's a senator, So in terms of the dynamic, the dynamic of their relationship, I think, is a little kind of unclear in terms of what it reveals about their culture. We know that arranged marriages are a big part of their culture, right? And so the idea of marrying for love or not marrying or basically choosing your own path is not their tradition, right? It's not their traditional custom. But the extent to which it is specifically patriarchal versus just being anti-agency, I think is somewhat unclear, But again, I think that's fine in the same way that I think, the dynamic in the ISB can feel like it's Like that's what it is. And it's evocative of that, whether or not it's actually saying that that's the attitude expressed within there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And then the separate thing is just, I totally agree. Like, I mean, obviously we currently also see these, like, you know, there's as much as, you know, people talk about, I'm really not a fan of generations and whatever, but like when people talk about Gen Z being this super progressive generation, there's also this polarity where there's a lot of, you know, if you look at this like alt-right movement, like a lot of it is younger people, mm-hmm. right? Like wanting to throw back to like the way things were in the 50s, which like, you know, for some people might be pretty attractive. For some other people, it's like, yeah, no thanks. Like hard pass on that one.
I think it's a generation thing, but it's also I don't want to call them immigrants, but they are from this other place. You know, she's Chantrillin, and yet she's been raised primarily in Coruscant. And certainly, like, you know, I had lots of friends who were the main ones I think of who did this were Jewish, but also I've certainly known Latina friends or other from immigrant communities or what have you, where their parents and maybe their grandparents were focused on assimilation. And now they're sort of like, okay, but actually I want to rediscover, you know, like klezmer music became a really big thing and speaking Yiddish became a really big thing among kids of my generation because there was sort of a like, I want to reconnect with the traditions of, you know, where my parents and my family comes from and that culture. And, you know, so yeah, I think, and that's, you're right. I'm putting a very patriarchal idea on it, and I think that's supposed to be implied. But there are some ways to see it in more positive ways, but it's just all of this is kind of connected and wrapped up in it. And like, it's again just funny that like the scene was maybe like what, a minute and a half, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. And yet it opens so many doors that I would love to see them explore.
Yeah, I would be willing to watch an entire episode on those girls talking about their religious, cultural stuff that they're thinking through in that scene. That would be an awesome episode. I mean, it would be kind of strange, but maybe it can be in Tales of the Jedi. But yeah, I mean, you can't ignore the fact that fascistic movements tend to be gender conservative. And I think that's still, we talked about it the last time you had me as a guest. I think it's still very much part of what Gilroy's trying to do. Oh, yeah. You know, did either of you see that Tony Gilroy was interviewed in Rolling Stone?
No, I didn't.
He went on this long tangent about a biography of Stalin that he read that really influenced the way he wanted to do it, from when Stalin was a bank robber.
Nice one.
Funding the revolution by robbing banks, which is why Lenin liked Stalin.
I love that my weird off-the-wall reference turned into not only your whole statement on Leninism, but now we've proven that Gilroy we were somewhat right in what Gilroy was thinking about.
Vindication.
Well, Luthen does sound like one of those strange made-up Russian revolutionary names to make sure the secret police don't get you, right? Stalin, Lenin, Luthen.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, we talked about it some, but I think I was really interested this week in all the different responses I was seeing to Luthen's speech, including a lot of people who were like, yeah, that's the person we need in America. Like, that's the kind of revolutionary we need here. And like, on some level, I agree. And on some level, I'm a little terrified about that because I might be the person he decides might have to die. Well, let's go into him some more because I also thought it's funny because, and actually, Paul, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. I know one of the critiques that's often made of Game of Thrones was that you have all of these different storylines that are all happening in different parts of the world, and it's hard to see how they all connect. And in some ways, I feel like this is a little bit similar. It's just that the connective tissue that holds them all together, it feels like what we're seeing is this one awful situation and how 5 different groups are all reacting to it. And so I really, it's a little bit of a side tangent there, or you can get to the main point of just, I really enjoyed the conversation with Luthen and Saw and thought it showed again a lot about how even Luthen's thinking is kind of evolving and changing about all this.
Yeah, I think in terms of the structure of this show, I think the fact that there's basically like 4 1/3 arcs, right, in the first season. I think the fact that that Cassian himself has had these very specific episodes, right? Each of which are like 3 or 2 episodes or whatever. And then there's the one kind of like transitional thing. I think that's really helped me in terms of feeling like I'm not just watching this one kind of sprawling story, right? It does feel episodic in some way in that regard. I also think a lot of the individual things that are going on in different areas have been kept. There's just like a tightness to it, you know, that I find just more appealing in terms of like the way a story is told. And also it's season 1, so it hasn't sprawled as much. Like Game of Thrones season 1 felt like there were a lot of characters. By the time it got into 3 or 4 or 5, it was like, I mean, okay, I stopped watching the show, but like, it just seemed like they just kept, like, they were making new characters faster than they were killing them off.
Yes,
right?
that's fair.
Which is impressive because they were killing off a lot of characters. But it helps here also that I feel like a lot of the characters sound different and look different from one another, you know, whereas like in a show like Game of Thrones, it's like, oh, some of these people look so similar. Like, how am I supposed to remember all of them? But yeah, here it does feel like there is one very central theme, and it's kind of everybody kind of like orbiting around it.
And
so it works for me in a way that,
the genius of that is none of the characters are just stereotypes and tropes. They all feel like real, actual characters, real, actual individuals. Whereas I only watched the first season of Game of Thrones because I don't like rape shows. But whereas many of the characters in Game of Thrones, from my memory, were like, here are the 3 things that we see as stereotypes in medieval fantasy kind of stuff, and we'll put them in this guy. And then that guy becomes that. And it's lazy writing, and there's not lazy writing in that way in this show.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I want to defend Game of Thrones, but it's mostly the books that I think have much more of that depth, so we're just going to stay away entirely. The books also have significantly less rape, although still way too much. But also...
yeah. Also wasn't a fan of that. Wasn't a fan of all the torture, which here I've got a little something to say about that in a bit. But I do think, like, Game of Thrones even like did a little better on that regard than a lot of shows do. You know, a lot of shows are like, here's the one thing about this character, and that's all you need to know. And then, you know who they are. Whereas maybe Game of Thrones was like, here's the 3 things about this character. But here it's like, I'm going to come back to the word effortless, because it feels to me like so many of the characters, I don't even know that much about them, but I feel like I know them as people. And that's just, I think it's just a union of excellent writing, excellent performances, and then, you know, I mean, direction and editing, I think, is something that like we haven't talked about that much, but like you don't end up getting a show that feels this well written without having great editing, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like editing is like great referees in sports, you know, like the best of it you generally won't notice, right? Because it just makes everything just flows so smoothly, unless it's not supposed to flow smoothly, unless there's supposed to be this kind of feeling that's a little bit jarring. And then like some of the camera movement too, it's like there's like in rewatching some of the early parts, like there's a lot of steady cam. There's a lot of like really subtle camera motions that like convey thought on the part of a character, right? Like an actor can sit there and make a facial expression. And you're like, oh, they're thinking. But like a subtle camera moment can... It doesn't feel like acting. It doesn't feel overt. It's like I'm only noticing it on my 3rd time watching it and being like, oh, you know, like the first time Dedra's in a scene, she hasn't even said anything yet. And there's this way that the camera's moving around her that I can feel like what she's thinking. Or I know that she's thinking about something that she's like, oh, what's up with this Star Path unit? You know, and I'm sorry, I got lost in just praise.
No, it's fine. And like, I mean, like one thing I did notice with her is that, and again, I wasn't studying this, so people can point out things that tell me I'm wrong. It is just my impression. But a lot of the times in the early episodes, particularly when she was kind of like the plucky young, the plucky officer who's trying to get her voice heard and we're kind of rooting for her, she was often shot from the side. And often it was just a steady shot, whereas now she's being shot much more straightforward. But also, you said it's like the camera moving around her. It's because she's not the world. The world is now moving around her a little bit more. And I just thought that was really interesting. But Saw and Luthen do have an interesting conversation, and I do want to get some thoughts on that.
Let me respond to Paul by adding a kind of a general thing, because I think he's exactly right, and I think it's really important. But I also think that everybody else on the show is working to do the exact same thing so that the camera movements work. I think the set design is awesome. I think the costumes are awesome, right? So I mentioned that my wife is out of town, so I'm watching too much TV, and I just rewatched Chernobyl, which is an HBO show about the Chernobyl disaster. The set designer from that is the set designer for Andor. And Chernobyl feels beautifully alien, 80s brutalist architecture, Soviet style, the way Cyril's home area feels brutalist. And the executive producer from that is one of the executive producers on this show as well. And I think Gilroy brought in people who are good at doing subtlety, so that you get a lot more than you would get in like a CW show, say. So right. I'm just really also just effusive praise. It's just really effortless is the perfect word. Paul is absolutely right.
Yeah. And it takes such a team, like one person doing something that's like really out of place can just basically break the whole spell, I think, and it's like, I mean, if your set direction's not on point, then, you're not going to find a camera angle that's going to, fix that. Right. So yeah, it just, the number of people who have to be, delivering, to make it feel like a place that is lived in, or many places, right? Because I mean, we've visited a number of places here on this show already, and yeah, it just I'm glad that you pointed them out as well, because credit to everyone, basically.
Yeah, I think the overarching themes of dealing with fascism, Gilroy is kind of living his response to that by making a team that deserves credit as a team instead of claiming individual ownership of the creative process.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so now
Luthen and Saw.
So, speaking of people trying to work together and maybe not having the best go of it.
Very true. Poor Krieger. Is that the name of the guy we keep talking about?
Yeah, Krieger. So just a quick note on, Luthen is talking to Saw Gerrera about Anto Krieger, right? And I always thought it was funny that Gerrera, it's pronounced a little differently here, and it's spelled different. It's spelled in, Star Wars spelling, but basically means warrior, right? In Spanish. And Krieger, or Krieger, means warrior in German. So
that can't be a coincidence. That's interesting.
It can't be. I mean, I'm I don't know whether it's someone had this specific thought. They're just look up warrior in another language. But so yeah, they're having this conversation. Saw and Luthen are about whether to leave Krieger just out to die. Right. Yeah. And,
but
yeah,
you're exactly right, because also Guerrera is the root Spanish word for where we get guerrilla from, right?
Yes.
But the German word Krieger is the formalized kind of warfare that von Clausewitz writes about, where states are meeting on battlefields and fighting. It's a different kind of war. And they're literally saying that's the kind of war we can't have. This is a revolution with guerrilla warriors in it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, to me, it was such a good scene, especially because Luthen had just done so much to establish that, he is the end point. He will make the decisions, and he gives this beautiful speech about all the things that he's had to give up and all this kind of thing. But then now he's kind of going against that a bit, in that he's bringing Saw into his decision-making process. And he's kind of saying, like, I want you to know this thing that I'm dealing with. And like, I just found it really striking, especially because it seems like Luthen's kind of changing his mind now, or at least he's not sure. And I wasn't sure if that's a kind of like, I want you to have to share the responsibility of this. I want someone else to have said we should do this, or like it is doubting himself at all, or just kind of what's going on there.
I thought it was 100% pragmatic, for what it's worth. I think he told Saw because he didn't see a way to not tell Saw. Mm-hmm. In that conversation, he started off just being like, no, you can't join. It's too late. It won't work. And then finally he's like, all right, the only way I'm going to, to actually get you to stand down is to tell you what's going on. And then make you feel like it's your decision, even though like we both know what you're going to do. Or maybe Luthen doesn't know what he's going to do, but he's like, I think he's like Andor, where he's constantly observing the situation, trying to control the situation, and when an opportunity presents itself, taking advantage of it, and when something's not going to work, then trying to pivot to something else. Mm-hmm. So I did see like this is now he is sharing this burden kind of with Saw, right? And sharing the decision-making process with Saw. But I don't think that was him going in and being like, okay, I'm going to change how I'm going about this. I think it was the ground was shifting under his feet. And he was like, okay, this is how I have to pivot in order to make this work still.
Didn't it make him scary? I found that it made Luthen a more frightening character. Because to me, the frightening person is the person who only tells you what they think you need to know in a life or death situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would make him someone very difficult to work with, right? And Saul's like, how can I trust you?
Right. Well, especially because he makes very clear the sort of like humanity. I realized I don't want to just throw Krieger away. It's wrong to like have these 30 people be killed. Like, not only does Luthen not say that, he's very clear that he is not saying that. He's very clear that he's saying like, I have no problem sacrificing people. I am now not sure if I should sacrifice these people. Which, yeah, I thought was both very like, it was chilling, but also in that like, it's just such a wonderful story dynamic of seeing someone. Like I'm currently looking at like the concept of villains and how one of the ways villains are often defined is that they have like the wrong way to get to a good goal, like we kind of agree with what they want, but they're going to extreme or something like that. That's technically Luthen, but that's not how he's described at all, because he's been presented up till now mostly as a hero. It's just that as he's going further and further along, we're becoming more and more, like seeing more and more of the lengths he's willing to go to. And I'm both chilled and kind of like, I don't want that, but also like, do I want to be saying, oh, you have to keep your hands not that dirty while you're fighting this horrific galactic empire and fascism? Like it's making me question myself in a lot of ways, which I think is exactly what the show is trying to do and why I love it.
I can't tell if his doubt is moral or tactical.
Oh,
I thought he specifically says that it's not moral, it's pragmatic. Doesn't he specifically say to Saw that this is just a pragmatic concern?
I didn't believe him. But I mean, the point is, if he can talk about, if he's like using the tactical stuff to help fuel his moral doubt, that is an interesting, complex character move, right? I don't think it is a problem tactically, but I do think it is a problem morally, and I think he's trying to figure out how to say that without saying that, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, I think there's like a large extent to which we don't really know who he is yet, and maybe we never will. We know what he wants, right? But he tells a different story to each person he talks to, and he's is he acting now when he's talking to Saw, or is he acting when he's in? I mean, he's clearly acting when he's in the gallery, right? But is that more how he was before, and now he's trying to maintain that facade, which maybe was who he was at some point? Or is that just an entirely fabricated character by him? And, is this, meeting you in the depths of Coruscant spy figure, like, is that a created persona as well? Or is that like the real him? It's unclear. What? And it did seem like he didn't want to, burn Cassian, right? Like, he didn't want to go and kill him, but like, it seems like Clea is like, well, that's, what you have to do in order to, preserve what we've built.
Right.
And it seems like now he wants to go and take care of it himself, even though she's like, no, you should stay away. There's too much heat there, basically. And we already, have an agent there, who doesn't know who you are. Right. So she can't give you up. But I do think like there is this uncertainty, just in terms of like who is he, what does he want, what does he want to go about things in a different way?
Well, I'm still on the theory that we talked about some last episode, in that I think the person who is most confused about what Luthen wants is Luthen. And I mean, like, he talked, that great
or how he wants to go about doing it.
Yeah,
right?
He talked in that great speech about all the things he's given up, and I think that there's definitely an element to, when you're spending so much time putting on different personas, you can kind of start to forget who you are and forget what, and I
right.
I like it's so interesting, because I do think that, like, in his mind, I think he thinks he's just being pragmatic and bringing in Saw, but I think there's some level of kind of what maybe you're saying, Matthew, of like he wants Saw, he wants a double check. Like he's wondering, like, is there something wrong with me that I'm not morally concerned about this? What would Saw think about this? Or like, and I think that's what is so powerful about the character is, I think in a worse show we would know exactly what he's thinking, or because there would be one specific answer. I don't think we're ever going to be able to say, no, it was exactly this or exactly that. I think all of us are right. I think they're all elements, because he's a very complicated person, like most people are, with a lot of very complicated things happening in his head.
Yeah.
Well, in his angry "I have been to the mountaintop" speech, which is what I'm going to call it now. In the last episode, he gave his angry "I have been to the mountaintop" speech, like the King speech, right? I may not get there with you.
Very different tone, though.
It's angry.
Yes,
but I felt as though one of his problems is he recognizes he's not going to get recognized for what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And he wants to be recognized. And that's the problem with, I don't know, revolutionary leaders. As soon as you're recognized, you're not a revolutionary leader anymore.
Right. I mean, we know that because we the audience know that Mon Mothma not only is she recognized in that world, like she becomes the leader of the Alliance and then the president of the New Republic, but also she's in the novels and the movies and all that. And like, I'd never heard the word Luthen until this show. He hasn't appeared as a character in any other piece of Star Wars, and so like, kind of like what you said a couple times, Paul, about going into Rogue One, it may be that he's just doing spy stuff throughout A New Hope and Empire and all that, and we just never hear about it. It may be that he's dead, but certainly I don't think Princess Leia or Luke Skywalker ever hear about this Luthen guy, And I think that's it. This kind of goes all the way back to something I was thinking before when you were talking about Marva and her being a hero. Because I was thinking that she's also, like, Mon Mothma is definitely going to get recognized. Luthen might get recognized, though you're convincing me that maybe he's not. But certainly Marva's never going to. She is doing is helping the rebellion in a lot of ways too, but no one's ever going to know that at the Mon Mothma Luthen level.
Yeah, for sure. She's not going to be on like a list of, heroes of the New Republic or whatever.
If you put together a list of characters in this show of people who are clearly going to be important to the revolt, the more important they appear to be, the less they'll be recognized, right? It seems like Nemec wrote the actual book for them. and we're never going to know who he is. And it seems like Luthen is establishing the methods from which it's going to happen, and without him, it won't, and we'll never know who he is. And Andor is going to die nameless to get the plans out.
I did love that it was just a second, but we learned that Andor still has Nemec's like manifesto that apparently he's got on audiobook of some kind, and that so Nemec is still with us in that little way.
Right, it's in his spy case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
there were two like kind of, I mean, I don't know whether they're actually meant to be like references to like the Bourne identity or not, but or if it's Tony Gilroy just like, you know, using a similar thing because, well, it's a spy thing. But the thing where where Andor and Melshi, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, are hanging off the cliff was like very reminiscent of when Jason Bourne's like escaping from the embassy in I think Zurich, and then Andor goes through this spy case, which is, you know, with like weapons and cash and like documents in it, which is also basically the first scene where you know Bourne finds out he's Bourne and not just Bourne, and it just felt like I don't know whether it was intended to be like a nod to his own things. I feel like probably not. It's probably just like, you know, I mean, spies have cases with a bunch of stuff in them.
Are you referring in the Bourne movies, which I haven't seen in a while? Are you referring to like the, oh my God, look how many passports that guy has moment?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. And then there's like all different currencies, and there's like a gun in there, and he throws the gun out and then takes the currency and the, which this character is not throwing the gun out. He's like, one for you, one for me.
I will say I had a little bit of a moment during that of, wait, no one has like rented his apartment this whole time that he's been, you know, in prison, and then realizing, oh no, someone did. Well, no, let me finish. And then realizing, no, someone did, but somehow hasn't bothered to either open or move this suitcase that's just sitting in the middle of their closet.
No, it's on top of the shower, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on top of the shower.
Oh, is that where it is? Okay.
Closet. Yeah, and I thought that might have been like his paramour in the bed sleeping.
Oh, I thought I saw someone with like mouth tentacles.
Like the same person might still be there.
It was an alien.
Like that wasn't his place.
It was an alien with like mouth tentacles.
Yeah,
and his paramour next to the alien. Okay,
maybe, you know,
that's you know, anything's possible.
Mon Mothma's daughter wouldn't like that.
I mean, who knows? Maybe that was like some polygamy situation. That's certainly very traditional, but who knows? Anyway, let's talk some about Andor, because we're almost to an hour, and I want to keep this not go on too much longer. And once again, we've not talked about our titular character yet much. And we don't get too much of a story, but I think we get a little bit of like, I like seeing that he's kind of like in this place of, you know, they're out of the prison, but they haven't gotten away yet. Clearly there's some kind of search going on. We don't know what's happened to poor Kino, and I'm afraid we're never going to find out. Although the memes that I've seen of him standing at the top with like a little, rubber ducky floaty thing around him are really great. But yeah, like what do you think of the little bit we got of Andor's story, and especially like him having this encounter with his two native aliens who wind up helping them?
Well, so first of all, this episode had like aliens, droids, and a space battle. So, like, what is this, Star Wars or something?
Yeah.
But
it's funny. I've been reading a lot of, like, I'm getting bothered by the lack of aliens. And Tony Gilroy just had it prepped up. It's like, nope, we're going to give you aliens right now.
Yeah, it's like, here we go.
I thought he wrote this episode, and it was the most Star Wars-y episode, so...
Yeah, exactly. And the first three, which also I think had more, biodiversity. Mm-hmm. Like the middle ones, I think, were the most human-y. But yeah, I enjoyed that encounter. I thought it was, you know, it was an opportunity for Andor to basically talk his way out of a situation, you know, and it did make sense that they were, at first like, you're the people who are here, destroying our planet. And like we learn, like, the Empire is not just using this planet as a, like penal labor camp planet. It's like they're also destroying the natural resources and not caring at all about, the indigenous population. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, I feel like they've hit us with that over and over and over without really like sitting on it for a long time all at once. Mm-hmm. It's like, because like to the Empire, like they don't care. So it's right. Like, it's almost like it's a footnote, but like, obviously it's everything to the people who live there. And I like that they were suspicious of them at first, but then ultimately let them go. 'Cause they're like, oh, you're actually also victims of the Empire. Okay, go ahead, Yeah,
in some ways it told me how little the Empire had interacted with these people, that they didn't realize that, like, because they just say like, oh, right. you're humans, you're Empire, you're the people who dump all this stuff in our waters. And it's only when they explain to them, like, no, we're just as anti-Empire as you are. Yeah, I thought it was really brilliant. And I just loved the, like, one of them speaking English and the other not. But him clearly... He sounded like he spoke the English. Like, in some ways, what he reminded me of is like listening to, people who are indigenous to areas that American soldiers are, who pick up kind of like the pidgin English, like in Vietnam or Korea or parts of Latin America or anything like that. And it was a short scene. It was funny. It gave a little bit of like comedic levity, which I really appreciated. But it was one more of those. Really, really driving home, like, what's happening in all these places that the Empire is.
And I think it's showing Andor seeing all of that, mm-hmm. right? Like which I think he already knows, but it's like he's just repeatedly confronted with it basically everywhere he goes, right? I mean, they blame him for bringing, the Empire down on Ferrix, but like, first there was Kenari, and that was the Republic, mm-hmm. but, kind of the same continuity, right? And then Ferrix, and then he goes to Aldhani, where the Dani have been driven off out of their homes, and, or their homeland. I mean, mm-hmm. if they're, nomadic shepherds or whatever, I'm not sure. But, and then on Nyamos, right? Like you go there and you can't even walk down the beach without getting grabbed by a K2 droid and almost killed, and then sent to prison to die and work for the rest of your life. And then on that prison planet, it's the same thing. It's like literally everywhere. And so I like how this episode had that one moment that's like the sort of can feel like the turning point in a character, right? Where he, his mom died and he wasn't there because, partially as a result of his own actions, like looking for his sister and then getting in the fight and killing the 2 security guards, or sentries. But also because of the Empire, right? I mean, that's why he was running. That's why, that fight happened basically in the first place because of the way the world is. And so this is kind of this powerful singular moment for him learning this, and then, staring off at the horizon, like Luke staring off at the horizon at the twin suns, like maybe thinking like, I want to do something about all this, but like a very different vibe. But the whole rest of the season has been moving him in that direction, right? It's like, it really is an arc. It's not like a character angle where it's just, there's this sudden pivot. I think now he is like, well, what am I going to do now? And he's newly free, right? But he also doesn't have a home to come back to in the same way that he did before, because his mom's not there anymore, outside of being a brick in a wall now.
Yeah, I think it's all really true. And I think we're gonna kind of see where that leads to. I mean, I've been excited for every episode, and with a show like this, you're always worried that they're going to like feel like it has to give some whiz bang episode that's going to tie everything up. And I know that there's going to be a season 2, but I feel like I'm I'm excited for next week's episode, but I'm not feeling like there's so much pressure on it that it has to do all these things that it can't possibly do. I think they've set it up very well that clearly there's going to be some kind of confrontation, and Cyril is throwing his hat back into the ring. I mean, he had another great scene that I think we're going to have time to talk about. Like, they're setting it all up in ways that I think are really interesting to see where Andor's character goes, but it just doesn't feel like it's overdone yet.
It definitely doesn't feel like there's going to be an unfortunate MCU third act CGI fight. But I can't quite figure out what's going to happen except somebody is going to say climb.
Yeah. I will say that given in animation and in the books, the number of times that people have just utterly clowned tractor beams is so high. I don't think we'd seen it yet in live action. So getting to see that, like, just every single time people have, like, been, oh, we're in a tractor beam. Oh, no, we'll get out of this. No worries. In the books, especially, it happens all the time. It's happened in Rebels a bunch of times. And now seeing it on live action, that definitely made me happy.
And the ship was from Rebels, too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The kind of Imperial spy ship or whatever?
Yeah,
the kind of mini... It's a triangle shape of the Death Star or the Republic cruisers, but with these huge antennas at the front and on the two sides.
Right. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I mean, that like sort of was one of those, like, you knew that there was some things about Luthen that you didn't know, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, he's actually a really serious pilot with these sick mods on his ship. You know, it's like, this is a spy ship, and seeing him actually tractor beams feel like they're inevitable in live action, and like they're like irrelevant in a lot of like, you know, animation and apparently the books. So it was nice seeing in live action, actually seeing that. I do think we might get a bit of a space battle in the third one, in terms of, like, I don't know how much we're going to see about what actually happens at Spellhouse, right? I would imagine it's not a lot. Like, this show really has a lot happening off screen. You know, I do think Marva dying off screen felt right, in terms of, like, you know, you don't need to see a body to know that someone's died. Like, and in terms of relating to Cassian, like, that's like the emotional weight here for the title character, is that he wasn't there. Yeah. Right. So having us not be there at that moment also feels right. Exactly. And not seeing more of Bix's torture, seeing, like, you don't need to have another scene of, like, her getting tortured to see, like, you just see her face. Yeah. You know, you see how she's holding herself, like, to kind of infer, like, what she's been through, right? The prisoners escaping or not escaping, you know, how many do you think made it? Not enough. But, like, we don't know, right? And because Cassian will never know. He's not going to know, right? We don't have to see all these instances of the Empire either hunting down or not hunting down prisoners. Maybe he runs into one in the future, maybe not, you know? Yeah. But that's the thing, like, when an individual's perspective, there's always going to be tons of things you don't know. And I think the show is very selective in terms of what it doesn't show us. It does feel like the last episode, there's probably going to be this Spellhouse thing, but then mostly it's everybody's going back to Ferrix, right? Luthen's headed there. Cyril's headed there. Dedra's obviously still got her eyes on there, and, you know, Cassian's probably heading back there. It would be a really interesting choice if he doesn't go back there, both for the character and the show, but I that would surprise me. Yeah. And you're right about all the stuff. Like, as you were saying that, I was thinking that in most other shows, we would see the dead bodies of some other escaped prisoners, you know, or we might even see, like, the TIE fighter thing that was flying overhead, like, shooting some of them. You know, we would see Bix is getting tortured. We'd see more of this, and we don't have to. And I think you're exactly right, especially that, like, I think if we had watched her die, Marva, him learning about it by telephone would have had nowhere near as much effect, because in the same way we're having that same experience. Like, oh wait, she's dead? How did that happen? I wanted so much more with her, which is exactly what Andor has. Exactly. All right. Well, I think we should probably start wrapping up. Is there any other last comment either of you want to make about the show before we move on? Before we wrap up?
I will say two things. because I'm really slow on the uptake sometimes. This is the first time I noticed that the Andor title card music is different in every episode.
Yeah, I think every 3 episodes, especially, right? There's like,
the instrumentation changes, and I was like, oh, wow,
exactly.
that is a good way of subconsciously convincing us that this is a different thing, which the show does really well. And also, I finally figured out the prison uniforms, which has been bugging me, but they're very reminiscent of the prison uniforms in George Lucas's first film, THX 1138.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's a nice reference. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, that's where they're from. But I looked it up and I was like, yeah, wow, they look very similar. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Especially because Lucas at this point has no connection to it anymore. Since he's sold all the rights, it's nice to have that kind of connection still happening.
Because Luthen's ship is a hot rod, and like hot rods are a big deal here, right? For Lucas,
and it looks a lot better than the Chrysler Town car. So.
Hey man, you can hate that, but I love that car.
That's fair. Paul, any last comments from you?
Yeah, I'm excited to see the last episode of the season. I'm irate that I'll have to wait 2 years to see the second season, but whatever, such is life. Mm-hmm. I think they're shooting it now, but like it does feel like it's going to be a lot to try and pull together. But I trust them to do a good job of it and to not give me exactly what I expect.
Yeah.
But something that I don't expect, but hopefully appreciate nonetheless. And the music, I loved when I watched the 4th episode, and it's like they start introducing like these drums under it. It was like the kind of like the drums of war or whatever. And that's just another little subtle thing. And also just the logo in that intro music is like so cool looking.
It really is. It really is.
It just feels right for the show.
Well, thank you both. And to our listeners, we don't know what Andor is going to offer you, but I want your help in figuring out what this podcast is going to offer you. I will continue to offer you cheesy transitions like that. That's never going to change. But once we do the last episode, obviously we're going to we'll probably go back to our coverage of Rebels. I'm going to probably start watching some Resistance and might be talking about that. We've had a lot of great feedback coming in, and I want to have a lot more, so we'll do at least 1, maybe 2 or 3 feedback episodes about Andor. But I want to know from you, what else do you want to know? So please contact us both with your Andor feedback, and also just to know what's more content that you want to see while we're between shows. I think Ahsoka is the next one coming, and that's not till early in the new year. There might be something else. I think Bad Batch season 2, I think, is coming right at the end of the this year or the beginning of next. But when we're not doing that, it's a great time for us so we can do more coverage of the books. We can do kind of deeper dives into particular topics. We can do anything you're interested in. So please write in. Let me know your Andor feedback. Let me know what you want to see more of from this podcast. If you're just the sort of person who just tunes in when we have new content, you're going to unsubscribe and then come back during Bad Batch. Totally get it and still love to have you listening, but would also love to keep you around. So let us know the kind of thing you want to hear. You can send us that by just emailing Matthew at theethicalpanda.com. Doesn't matter if you capitalize it or not. Theethicalpanda.com. And you can just go to the website, theethicalpanda.com, and find all the information on our website about how to contact us, give us feedback, find the other podcasts that I'm doing, find out all the other cool stuff. So please do that. And of course, both Paul and Matthew are also doing other great stuff. Matthew, short of moving to Brooklyn and applying for a Bachelor of Arts education, though I imagine studying with you is awesome, what are you up to these days?
Right now, I am editing a book on the Horizon Zero Dawn games, which is a thing that has reminded me that if you don't do borrowing from other cultures carefully, you can really screw it up. And so that's why the Andor is so good. So I'm working on that because it's part of my series, academic books called Studies in Gaming, which you could find just by Googling Studies in Gaming in my name. We've got about 50 titles now, and the next one coming out next year that you're going to like, Matthew, is on Magic the Gathering. So you should be very excited by that. So I'm just working on those and trying to make my students learn. But I have some great students this semester, so I have nothing to complain about. So yeah, that's it. And you can find that, and you can find me on Facebook probably by my name.
Awesome. And I know that No Talking to People November is still going on for you, Paul. Is there any content you've created recently, or should people just kind of wait for the bat signal to go back up before they start Googling for Zen Madman?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still Zen Madman in a bunch of places that may or may not get deleted at some point. I have a website, zenmadman.com, that doesn't really have anything on it now, but may at some point, which I may or may not tell you about at some point. And I might write some other stuff that I don't even publish under my own name. So that's totally irrelevant to this conversation. But in terms of like recent stories that I've thought of that will likely not write myself, I'm just going to say like B2E's like reaction to Marva's death made me really think one Star Wars story that I'd love to see that I doubt we'll ever get is like R2's life right after Anakin becomes Vader.
Oh.
Like, because like they were tight.
And I know that I think you're right that we probably won't get it officially, but I also know that Star Wars has a huge fan fiction community, many of whom are listeners, and it has been reassured to me not all fan fiction is about sex. There is some other great stories out there too. So yeah, if you found the R2-D2 after Anakin stories, which may involve him finding comfort in the arms of a Gronk droid, or may not. Either way, send us the link because I'd love to know what kind of if people have been writing that stories or if they haven't.
Yeah, or write it and send it in.
Yeah, write it and send it in. We'll give you some credit in some way, shape, or form. Cool. Thank you both so much. Thank you all you listeners for sticking through us. Hope you've been really enjoying the show. Hope you stick around as we go into new territory after next week. And most importantly, have a good day while you fight your own revolution.